Okay, we're live, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, welcome everybody to Senate Ag. We'll go ahead and do a roll call.
Senator Bouchard,
Excused?
Senator French,
Here.
Senator Cost,
Here.
Senator Wasserberger,
Here.
Chairman Boner.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have 4 present, 1 excused.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. The first bill we have is House Bill 3, State Land Leases. This is dealing with vacant lands. So hopefully this is an old friend, certainly for this committee. It looks like there were some changes in the House. So if anybody would like to, it looks like I have somebody from State Lands, potentially go up, and if you have a summary of what the House changed, maybe that'd be a good way of starting us off. And looks like there are a few differences here. So feel free to come on down. And notice one difference right off the top, but welcome Director Scoggins, and yeah, feel free to give your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jennifer Scoggin, the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. Deputy Director Crowder's been working most of these Ag Committee bills, and unfortunately he has the flu today, so he will not be here, so you get me instead. So I may not know all of the specific changes on the House side, but I think the one change that is concerning to us is the most recent revision where the on page 2, lines 20 through 22, remove the provision which allowed the board some discretion in making the leasing decisions. While you know, certainly it looks to us now like we're kind of back to where we started last year, where, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but the fix is in, if you will, or the perception could be that the fix is in if the board doesn't have the ability to address situations on a case-by-case basis. Like, you know, maybe there's some, you know, misdeeds going on with somebody who is an applicant in proximity, but they get the preference just because of that proximity. Maybe they're not in good standing with the board. Maybe there's somebody who wants to apply to lease the vacant land, but they are not in proximity, but maybe they have an easement across there to get there, and maybe they have a better idea for leasing or a better plan. But the way that removal of the board's discretion in the most recent version of the bill, we have concerns with, as I mentioned, because of the lack of discretion now of the board. We do appreciate the addition. There was some language added that talks about how the board does not have to award a preference to a bad actor who's significantly violated laws related to state trust lands. I'm not sure what significantly violated means as opposed to violating, but in any event, you know, we appreciate that discretion, but we're concerned that it may not go far enough in allowing the board to entertain different applications on a case-by-case basis. The other piece of it is, if in fact now only a preference is granted solely by proximity, we're afraid that it may have a chilling effect on those who are even willing to participate in the bidding process in the first place. As I mentioned, if there's a perception that the fix is in, that you can never, as an applicant who doesn't have that proximity, if each and every time somebody's going to beat you out or meet your bid, we're afraid that they just simply aren't going to bother in the future, which we think may in fact depress our ability to get the best price, if you will, for the trust beneficiaries. So those are really our concerns, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I would stand for any questions. Hopefully I can answer them.
Okay. Any questions for the director? Okay, well, I certainly agree that is concerning, that part of it. As the main change that we made to the bill based off feedback we got from the executive branch, and you know, I guess scratch my head why that part was taken out, but it's easily fixed here in committee. So looks like there's an additional concept of not just being adjacent to land, but also gaining access to the land. Do you have a perspective on that? I found that intriguing. Is there any perspective you'd like to share?
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't quite sure why they added that they have access or can gain access to, because it seems to me if they're in proximity, they've already met that criteria to have access to the land. But I could be missing something there, and I'm happy to entertain whatever information you might have on that.
Well, it seems like it might open it up a little bit and alleviate some of those concerns.
Right.
While still maintaining the intent of the way I understand it, that, it's not just about the highest bid, it's about who's going to be able to care for the land the best, assuming that, close proximity and access is a significant factor in that. So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I understand it now, all of the qualifications, if you will, are all lumped up together. So it's 36.5.101 and 36.5.105, that they're all now together. And perhaps that was just a piece of it to qualify in the first place that I missed previously. So I appreciate that.
All right, any further questions, committee? Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Okay, any further public comment? Mr. McGagnon, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon, the Wyoming Stockers Association, also testifying on behalf of the Wyoming wool growers today. And just to be very straightforward and keep it simple, Mr. Chairman, with the exception, which I'll speak of in a moment, about the access provision, the rest of the changes that were made in the House, frankly, were changes that we proposed to the House and made the bill acceptable to us. We had some concerns with the bill as it was previously came forward, and we worked with others to develop these changes, and we're pleased that they were adopted, so we would encourage your support for the bill. As far as the language dealing with gaining access to the land, it's our view that that probably isn't necessary because there's already a requirement that you have a necessary use for the land. If you can't access it, you can't make use of it, but we don't believe it causes any problems to be in there, so we've not raised any issues, any concerns with that. The other language that was mentioned by the previous speaker was on lines 12 through 14 about significant violation. We felt that was important because we've seen some instances recently with state land where something as simple as being a few days late in submitting an application or something was deemed to be and these were with lands that weren't vacant, but was deemed to make the lands become vacant. And we think that the office needs to provide on the board a reasonable standard of if there's a significant violation, that's important, but working with people to not create difficulties where they don't need to be there. And that was the reason for that language. The language at the bottom of page 2 on subsection A on one applicant being eligible for the preference was again language that we felt was essential because without that we felt that the preference really wasn't meaningful. To us, the preference means that as long as you meet the high bid and if you've otherwise qualified, you receive the land, the lease over someone else who doesn't have that preference, and that's the concept of a preference. So that was our reason for that particular change. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the stock growers? Okay, just sorry if I missed it, but that part where we remove the board's ability to make a decision whether preference would apply or not, do you have a position on that? That was a substantial change to the bill that made it palatable to everybody. I guess that has to sign off on this during the process. So I guess I want to get your perspective, particularly on that at the bottom of page 2.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, which section are you referring to?
Yeah, so page 2 is in the original copy, not the engrossed copy. It says when the State Board of Land Commissioners determine the preference is in the best interest of trust beneficiaries, and that triggers the detailed provisions that are set out in statute. And that was the key that gave the SLIB the ability to decide ultimately, whether a preference was applicable or not. It was important to members of the SLIB that they retain some flexibility. And so
Mr. Chairman.
that was removed, and, you know, I think that's deeply problematic that they removed that, because we found out the hard way that is.
We were concerned, Mr. Chairman, that respectfully, that the preference didn't have much meaning if it's simply at the discretion of the board whether or not the preference exists. The section up above, the first part of page 2, states that begins page 16, preference shall be given to applicants who are owners, lessees, or occupants of adjoining lands. That's our understanding of how the preference has always worked in the past and is supposed to work. It's an absolute preference. The only requirement to exercise it is, 1, that you be in good standing, but 2, that you meet the high bid, whichever of these processes that ends up taking place under. If you meet the high bid, your preference is protected. And that provides to us some assurance that if you're the owner of adjacent land and that parcel of state land is essential and fits your operation, maybe you'd had it one time and became vacant, maybe you haven't had it, but it's become vacant, that for the preference to be meaningful, certainly you may have to pay a higher price for it, but that you're absolutely protected with the right to exercise your preference.
It doesn't bother you that this is a poison pill in the bill?
Mr. Chairman, to me, it does not. I think it's essential to protecting the rights that the existing law has always provided for a party with the preference.
Okay. Any further discussion? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further public testimony?
Good evening, committee. Marguerite Herman. I'm here for a group called the Advocates for School Trust Lands, and we're a group that represents Western states, which are the only states that have school trust lands pretty much left. And we're concentrate on the best fiduciary management of those school trust sections as intended in our Constitution, in our Act of Admission, and in our statutes, that they be administered, held in trust and administered with as you are trustees for the benefit of the beneficiaries, who are the school children, which was sort of the rationale behind the whole exercise. So at the risk of stating the obvious, so I'm here with that in mind. And I'm speaking actually kind of against the bill in favor of the current practice, which is very different between a preferential right and a preference. The preferential right was established actually in the Riedel versus Anderson, Wyoming Supreme Court decision, which acknowledged that the act of, that the existing lessees have a preferential right to meet the highest bid. They acknowledged, justices acknowledged it depressed the value of the lease, of the bids, but that was okay. That was allowable because of the greater good of keeping sections in ranches have been, or agricultural production for generations. It kept them there, and that was worth the foregoing income to the trust. I'm suggesting that the way this bill is written, it's losing the distinction between a preference with the vacant lands, which I consider very much different, with a preferential right. I mean, the distinction is getting very blurred at this point, and because, meeting the highest bid, and vacant land, I think, is very much different from land that is already leased. It's already part of an operation, and I think what the bill is doing, actually, just like the Supreme Court said, it does, when you meet the highest bid, you don't have sealed bids. It does depress competition, which, as we all know, depresses the revenue. And I think it somewhat abrogates the responsibility to get the highest revenue from these trust lands, because they are trust lands. And I think that the current practice, which plenty of gatekeeping, that you be good lessees, you don't have any bad history, you have a use for the land, a productive use for the land. There are a lot of things that just get you in the front door as a qualified bidder. And I think those are a protection against people who would not use the land, or maybe use it or damage the trust so that it damage the revenue producing ability. So I think the way the OSLI has done it up to now and the Board of Land Commissioners, you have to have all those in line before you even start bidding. So I think you've eliminated the bad actors at that point. And the preference simply says if you are an adjacent landowner, you stay in the game. You don't win the first round, you stay in the game, you're at the table the second, but it's sealed bids, which again is very different. If you have an existing lease, that's meet the highest bid. And you can talk to and see what that does to the number of contested leases. They're pretty much zero because it doesn't get you anywhere except it makes an enemy of your neighbor. So I guess I'm speaking in favor of the current practice as it is in the Office State Lands and Investments. I think, they are carrying out the duty, the trustee duty, and the way the bill is now, it's getting closer and closer to a preferential right. There's very little difference at this point, and I'm suggesting that preference. If you do have something for a vacant land, it should be a much lesser preference than the preferential right. And I stand for questions. I don't know if I've made my stance clear.
Okay. Any questions? Yep, it's clear. Thank you. Any further public comment? Okay, we don't have anybody online. Okay, going once, going twice. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, moved by Senator French, second by Senator Cost. Any amendments?
I'm a little, Mr. President,
Go ahead.
I'm a little concerned with pulling that out. I think it eliminates some competition. That from the original to the engrossed, I'm a little concerned that they've taken some possible competition out by the preference that they've got there. That concerns me.
All right, so you're referring to the in the original copy, that
Yes.
that language that I spoke
Yes.
to, where ultimately the SLIB determines whether a preference is applicable or not. But once they do, it's a very clearly defined process.
Right.
Right. Okay. And I have to say, I share those concerns, committee, that the whole, because, in my mind, the point of this bill is to provide clarity in the process, which does not currently exist. But also you have to balance that with the ability to ensure that the SLIB has the ability to make a good decision. And we're not going to be able to anticipate every last circumstance that may arise in every decision they have to make where maybe that preference isn't appropriate. And so that was if you remember, we had testimony from members of the SLIB at our meeting in Gillette. And that was an important point of contention. I think it is important that we reinsert that language to ensure that we do get the bill past the finish line and make sure that we accomplish the goal, which isn't to guarantee an outcome, but to help ensure that the process is seen as fair and uniform.
I would move to amend that back in.
Okay, to be clear, we're talking about on the language that's on page 2, lines 15 through 23 of the original copy, not the engrossed copy. Basically insert that into and replace paragraph 1 on page 2, lines 16 through 19.
Yes.
If that's clear for staff. Okay.
So you're talking this one right here?
Yes. Yeah, insert this language instead of this. So any discussion on that amendment? Senator French.
Would you clarify that, Mr. Chairman, again, to replace an engrossed to what page would?
Right. So on the engrossed, you're looking at page 2, lines 16 through 19, that paragraph
Okay.
will lie. And instead, if you go to your white copy, yeah, so basically delete that lines 16 through 19 and in its place, insert the original language we passed as a joint committee that gives, and I could read it if you like, Senator French, but it's basically gives us the ability to determine whether or not the preference applies at the outset, but once they do, then there's a clearly delineated process for applying the preference. So that's the amendment. So any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. We're back on the bill. Okay, I like the notion of significantly violated. Maybe that's a rule that we can further define what significantly means. But I think we understand what we're getting at, and there's a difference between somebody who's just gonna be brazen about their violation of our statutes and rules and somebody who just maybe didn't get the paperwork in on time. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. But overall, like I said, we've worked this over 2 sessions now. I think we've got it in place where hopefully it's agreeable to everyone, so. Go ahead and call the roll if nobody else needs any other statements. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard submitted an absentee vote of aye. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger.
Aye.
Chairman Boner.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5 ayes, do pass amended.
Okay, next bill up is Senate File 4, water permits, livestock on federal land. Have Mr. Gephardt here, I assume, can speak to this bill. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Brandon Gebhardt, State Engineer. There was one amendment on the House side, and on page 3 of the engrossed bill, what the amendment did is on line 14 of page 3, added the word seeking after without, so without seeking the consent. And then on the same page, line 22, it used to say by filing a name change, and this amendment changed it for a permit assignment accompanied by documentary evidence. And both of these were suggestions by myself and the Board of Control member.
Okay, so it doesn't really change the intent of the bill. It's necessarily just a little cleanup language to make it work a little bit better. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the seeking, I think, is an important one for us. It just, if for some reason somebody doesn't agree to something, even though the proposed change is positive and good, somebody may object to that for reasons outside of the value of the water change. This allows us to be the judge on a case like that, or the Board of Control.
Okay, makes sense. Any questions, committee? And as a reminder, this bill is meant to, basically you would issue a water permit on federal land to the, well, it still goes to the federal agency, but there has to be a lessee attached to the permit. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, an assignment to a permittee is part of the water right.
yep, important to understand that, we have a beneficial use doctrine in the state, and federal agencies don't own livestock and they don't use water per se, even though they own the land, and we need somebody that actually is going to use it to apply, and we're just making sure that both their names are on the permit. So. Okay, so any questions right now? The director. We also have a amendment that was submitted by staff. I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at it. It's also some cleanup on page 4, line 15 of the engrossed copy. Basically, after 5, insert successive, meaning that, if it's 5 years in a row, not necessarily, 1 year here, 2 years there. I think that's a good catch.
Where's that go?
Page 4, line 15.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe that is within state law as well.
You don't see any problem with that? Not to put
I
you on
do
the
not,
spot.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Hopefully just a technical correction as identified by staff. So, okay, any questions for the director? Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, any public comment on this bill? Okay.
Thumbs up back there.
Somebody gave a thumbs up. That's good. Good to know. Double checking there's nobody online. Okay, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Senator Cost.
And I'll move the amendment on page 4.
Okay, movement. Senator Wasberger moved the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. That amendment passes. Any discussion on the bill? Okay, let's go and do a roll call.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard submitted an absentee vote of aye. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Wasberger.
Aye.
Chairman Boner.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5 ayes. Do pass amended.
Okay, thank you very much. And Director, just so you know, we're not going to get to House Bill 2 today. So, thank you. Yeah, just so you know. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, last bill for our consideration is House Bill number 5, Wild Horse and Burro Management. Nice, clean, not an engrossed bill here, though I think there were some changes when it came to the appropriation. Or maybe not. Okay, well. So as a reminder, committee, there's 2 main ideas in this bill. First of all is the idea that we're going to sort of ensure that everybody knows how much the inability of the federal government to manage these wild horses is costing state government. When we talk about our school sections, also believe there's some interaction with private land there as well. But also, I'd say most importantly, we have on page 6, paragraph F, the governor's authorized in their cooperative agreements to help with this problem. And the idea being that we do have some one-time funds we can use to increase the infrastructure we can utilize within the state. The federal government can utilize in the state, even private individuals can utilize to increase the capacity that we have to deal with the excess wild horses that are in the state of Wyoming, and certainly acknowledge the efforts of the Beyond to help get this problem under control, but also recognizing that this is going to be an ongoing issue. So with that being said, we have the Department of Agriculture and the Department of State Lands. If either agency or both agencies wants to come down and provide their perspective and testimony on this bill, more than welcome. Director Miyamoto has been voluntold, it looks like, to come on down. So. Welcome to Ag Committee. Director, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Agriculture. I get voluntold a lot of times, so I'm accustomed to that. But yeah, with respect to this bill, our main interest in it is we're not mentioned, specifically in the bill, but are interested in any information we can glean about the specifics of what management might entail. And I'm available to answer any questions about the tact that the Department of Agriculture has taken up to this point in time. We have a long history of, interfacing with our federal counterparts on all things wild horse issues. Anytime that there's been a Federal Register notice of planned actions as they relate to wild horses, the Department of Agriculture is always commenting on those, and we're pretty engaged in trying to make sure that all of the tools that are outlined in the Wild Horse and Burro Act to maintain those herd management areas at appropriate management levels are used. We've seen a continual pullback of not utilizing all of the different parameters available in the Wild Horse and Burro Act to maintain control of those populations. And that's what we've been fighting against for a long time at the Department of Ag. Most of the work that we do is on the policy front, but I wanted the committee to know that that's primarily how we've been involved in the wild horse debate over the years. We're happy to help in any way that we can. This has been a situation that has spiraled out of control for some time now. So happy to answer any questions that you have for me.
Any questions for Department of Agriculture? Senator Wasberger.
Just a quick question, and I know there was a roundup by the federal government, and do you know the actual numbers that were rounded up? And how long will it take, in your estimation, for us to have, for the wild horse population to be back where it is or was before the roundup?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, I wish I had the specific numbers with me to be able to, let you know what the statistics are, but I can give you some general ideas. Typically, when the BLM does a gather, their aim is to get the population back down to something around high appropriate management level for that herd management area. We would prefer they go lower, obviously, because those populations grow quickly. The question that you ask about the timing and how long it takes for those horses to bump back up against that upper threshold is a good one. The science indicates to us that the populations tend to double every 6 years out on those herd management areas. That's kind of the formulation that BLM uses to estimate population numbers. So that's not a formula that is hidden from view or anything like that, but those populations grow very quickly.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, follow up, and then, so I read an article in the paper and I thought they said that they rounded up 3,500 head relatively. They would not say specifically what it was. So it would take 6 years to get back to essentially 7,000.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, if there wasn't any temporary fertility control applied or any spaying or gelding, yes.
So, and then the last question. So, and you may not know this one. So how does the wild horse herd impact our sage grouse population?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, we've done a fairly deep analysis of, impacts to wildlife. Now, that wasn't something that was conducted primarily by the Department of Agriculture, but going back to, I believe, 2012, that was kind of the basis of a lawsuit that the state of Wyoming filed against BLM initially. So this is one categorization of damage that the state of Wyoming can catalog in making a claim. Damage to state lands would be one of those. Damaged wildlife would be another one. As you can imagine, sage grouse was a fairly hot topic back in 2012, and we were trying to quantify the amount of damage that wild horses were doing to that species in particular, but other wildlife species as well. One of the major influences that feral horses tend to have on the landscape that has been documented and is in the literature is the impact on water sources. And so they have a great affinity for being territorial around water sources and basically pushing everything else out to the side. If there was ever a vulnerable species, it's sage grouse. Almost no matter what impact you have on like a sagebrush ecosystem out there, it's bound to affect sage grouse. They're kind of a canary down the mine shaft, so to speak.
So in that lawsuit, what was the federal government's response?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, I think that even the federal agencies might acknowledge that there's a problem there, that they are impacting wildlife habitats. I don't know as though anybody would deny it. Their ability to respond is so hampered by criticism on all fronts. Anytime they try to do anything, they get an earful. And then lack of budget is another consideration. From our standpoint, within the state of Wyoming, if memory serves me correctly, we were just unable to quantify our damage appropriately, be able to prove that this was being caused by feral horse populations and not some other factor.
No further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
Any questions? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, Director. On page 6, line 4 through 18, it describes where the governor can enter into cooperative agreements with different agencies. The Eastern Shoshone Tribe and the Northern Arapaho Tribe, which makes up the Wind River Indian Reservation, that's a sovereign nation, correct? So can they and the governor make an agreement to do whatever the parties want to do? I mean, those two tribes can say, we want to reduce it by 50%, 75%, whatever. Are they the controlling say in this over the federal government, where they're a sovereign nation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, I'm not an expert on what sovereignty means in the context of wild horse and burro management, but here's what I think, what I believe, for whatever it's worth. Those horses enjoy the protections of the Wild Horse and Burro Act, and even once those horses are adopted, the BLM has a tendency to look at the welfare of those horses past that adoption date for a period of time. They recently promulgated rules to extend the time frame for follow-up. So there's a limitation as to the discretion that you have when you take, so to speak, custody of those horses, in my understanding. There's a limit as to what you can do.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So are you saying the Wild Horse and Burro Act trumps the sovereign nations, those two tribes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, no, I just don't know.
Okay, all right. thank
And
you.
we do have somebody who's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the reservation that will testify a little bit later, so, yeah. Any further questions, committee?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Director.
Sorry I
Appreciate it.
couldn't
Yeah.
provide better information.
Okay, it looks like we have the Livestock Board here as well as State Lands, so feel free to, whoever wants to go next, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm Jennifer Scoggin, the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. I have with me Ben Bump. He is our Assistant Director for our Field Services Division. And so in the event that this bill goes forward, I think much of the responsibility would fall under his purview. So he's prepared some comments on behalf of the agency. I just wanted to say first that, any information about what might be the expectation of the legislature for OSLI, I guess the devil's in the details. We're trying to understand our role in this, particularly with respect to, for instance, just as an example, what constitutes failure or refusal to move wild horses? Do we need to ask for the removal? Is another agency or entity going to ask? As I mentioned, these are all things that we'll have to work out in the future once we understand, but we certainly want to do our part here to help out. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield to Mr. Bump for additional comment.
Officer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ben Bump with the Office of State Lands and Investments. Just a few things to mention here. House Bill 5 gives us a couple of responsibilities. The first one is to, upon that refusal or failure to remove those wild horses that stray and graze regularly on the non-federal lands, is to determine the cost of that using the methodology that is laid out here in the bill. And then to provide a annual notice, request reimbursement for those costs on those non-federal lands. During the interim, we ran a sample calculation using that methodology and put that in a spreadsheet and provided it to the committee. So we can certainly handle that. Just one more thing to note, that definition of affected non-federal lands includes the state, municipal, and county lands upon which the landowner has proof of that grazing by wild horses. And so we would certainly look to the counties and municipalities and our grazing lessees to help us gather that information.
All right, any questions for State Lands? And so if we were to insert some language of, page 3, line 13, as, excuse me. No. So as determined by State Lands, by the governor, when they determine what's a failure and what's not, if there's somebody we're going to, make the decision maker, would you feel comfortable director, that being the director of state lands? Should it be the governor? Should it be the SLIB? Do you have any preference there?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that OSLI would be in a position to make that determination, so we would prefer, the governor or the SLIB or somebody else who has that information. Whatever information we would gather would likely come from our lessees or from the counties and municipalities. I'm not sure that we would be actively pursuing that. We would probably need a notification of that. So we'll leave it to you, Mr. Chairman, with respect to who might be the appropriate body to make that call, and then certainly we can follow up afterwards.
Any questions, committee? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your input. Okay, Director True. Feel free to come on down. You're the last one standing here.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you, Steve True from the Wyoming Livestock Board. Our agency really has no testimony on the bill, but I do have some information pertaining to Senator Wasserberger's question, in that on the 5 HMAs that were gathered this fall and winter in Wyoming, they took 4,161 head, but a net of 3,500. They returned some to the range, both mares and fertility-treated mares and some stallions. So that was the net. You had the right number. 3,500 is what came off of the HMAs at this time. Beyond that, I'd be happy to answer or try to answer any questions the committee might have for our agency.
Right.
And those are BLM numbers, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the question would be then, so you talked about fertility control. How many wild horses had fertility control?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I don't know what they may have treated in the preceding year or so. They have 2 treatments available, a 1-year shot and a 2-year shot. But it says that they did 290 mares this trip during this gather. So those would be part of the horses returned to the HMAs.
Be safe to assume that half were mares, half were stallions, so that'd be correct.
I'm not aware, Mr. Chairman, that they worked any stallions. I think, yeah, stallions went back. Some of the stallions went back, but I'm not aware that they doctored any of those.
Right, but that would account for the entirety of the number that was returned to the range. And
Right. They say they returned. No, they don't. They don't include that. They break down what they gathered. 1,603 stallions, 1,700 mares, and 858 colts. And then they just say they returned X amount of horses. They don't break it down again.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you don't know whether it was 1 or 2 year sterilization shots?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I'm not aware of which treatment they used on these mares.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, we'll open up to public comment. Ms. McGagnon, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagna, on behalf of the Wyoming Stock Growers and Wool Growers, and we certainly strongly support this bill as it's written. Think it accomplishes a couple of things. One, it simply serves as a way to call attention to the fact that state and state lands are being impacted by these excess horse populations, and provides some additional tools that the state can work with. Just to add one more component to the question that Senator Wasserberger asked, one of the problems we've had, and we've been encouraging the BLM to try to change their methodology, when they propose a horse gather, they typically propose to gather down to what they call the lower AML, which is the minimum number of horses they've agreed that the land will support, then allow those numbers to build back up to the high AML before they start another gather. But because of the National Environmental Policy Act process they have to go through, and because sometimes litigation they have to defend against, the number that they calculate the day they announce their intent to do a gather sometimes there's 20, 30% more horses out there by the time they finally complete the gather. So what we have encouraged them to do and what hope to get accomplished is that instead of saying we're going to gather 3,500 horses, for example, they would say we're going to gather down to the lower AML, and they would gather whatever number of horses it takes to get to that management level. That would have far more meaning, because we've seen examples where by the time they complete the gather, they're already back at the upper AML with the horses that are left out there. So that's not really pertinent to what this bill would accomplish, but it's one of the significant problems that we have with their gathers not being meaningful. And of course, the other thing is they gather an area. They did a significant gather, the largest one they've ever done this past year. But in their horse management area, that more as you move toward Lander and that, they're way over AML. They've proposed a gather for next year of 2,700, I believe, there. But as they've just expressed to us recently, they're competing against Nevada and the other states to get an allocation of funds and of holding space for those horses. So there's no guarantee that just because they've announced an intent to gather, that the gather will actually take place. So it's significant in many ways, an ongoing problem. Much of the fault, as has been pointed out, doesn't allow with the BLM, certainly not at the state and local level, but with the system that's in place that is simply not feasible. With that, Mr. Chairman, again, I would just urge your support for this bill. Happy to take any questions if there are.
Any questions, committee? Well, I do have one. So we removed about 3,500 horses now.
Yes.
What does that put us statewide? Do you have those numbers in terms of over the high AML?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, that's a difficult one, because the AML is determined for each HMA, horse management area, and I've not seen those added up. I would just make a guess, and it's strictly a guess, that if you look at all of the horse areas in Wyoming, we're probably today 3,500 to 4,000 heads still over the lower AMLs, even after they've gathered that one area. But that's just really a guess on my part, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Well, that's probably hopefully something we can add up, or somebody can add up. Maybe your organization can help, so you can present updated information to our colleagues when this hits the floor. I think that'd be important. And it's important to acknowledge the progress, significant progress, but
We'll
also
certainly
we have
try to find some information on that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll hear from some folks who were on the reservation about the numbers there. We actually have some updates from that part of the state as well. So everything's coming together. I think we'll have a good assessment of just how, in spite of the significant efforts of the BLM, just how much work is left to be done. And that's why it's important to get that appropriation put back in there, I think, personally. So we'll see how our colleagues on appropriations feel about it. But did you agree that it's important to use some of these one-time funds to help assist with this problem?
Mr. Chairman, I think that certainly helps, yes. I mean, the two components of this legislation that deal with determining the population and invoicing the federal government to pay for those, and then the second part, which is giving the Attorney General some added authority to file for writ of mandamus. Those two are really not dependent on appropriation of money. But the third part that could be helpful, and that is the cooperative work with the federal agencies and with the tribes and other non-government organizations, et cetera. I think that's where the funding was directed. And so I think some of that could be done without the funding, but certainly be more effective if we were able to have the funding.
Okay, any questions, committee? All right, thanks, sir. Any further public comment? Okay, we do have somebody online. Looks like we have Pat back from Fish and Wildlife. If you could go ahead. There you are. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. If possible, may I be able to share my screen? It doesn't look like I'm able to do that at the moment, but
acceptable to me. I don't know if we have the technical capacity to do it, but if it's possible, we'll go ahead and get that going.
Mr. Chairman, that ability should be enabled at this point.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to give it a shot.
okay, I will give it a shot here. All right, thank you. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
We can.
Okay, excellent. So just to introduce myself, I'm Patrick Nellick. I work with the Fish and Wildlife Service here in Lander. And our primary mission of this office is to assist the two tribes on the Wind River Indian Reservation. And I've provided testimony before in the last year to the committee regarding feral horses on Wind River. And at the urging of some of the members in the past, there was a request for us to conduct a survey, aerial survey of horses on the reservation to get a general idea of the numbers that are there. There hadn't been a survey done since 2012. BIA did that, and it was not a comprehensive survey. So in January and February here of this year, we helped the tribes conduct that survey. And if I may, for the next 5 minutes or so, I'd just like to present that information to the committee.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So based on a survey, you can see this is the aerial routes that we flew. What we did was fly transects approximately 1.5 miles apart in a small airplane. And this covers the entirety of the reservation. That had not been done before. And so during that survey, we found over 5,000 horses that were counted, which is a very substantial number. See if I can minimize this a little bit. There we go. So this image here shows the reservation boundary, and each dot is a horse group that was seen from the air. I would also mention that the estimate that we have is what we call a minimum count. It's not a population estimate because there are horses that we miss on the survey, and we don't know what that number is. But horses being large animals in an open landscape like this, we feel pretty comfortable that we counted the majority of the horses. But again, there's still a percentage that we've missed. So the 5,000 is a minimum count. So you can see that they're distributed quite broadly across the reservation, and each dot represents the size of the group. Typically, horses averaged about 10 to 15 in a group, but upwards of 200. One thing I would mention is this area and this area being the East Fork of the Wind River. There are horses that are moving on to the state-managed Spence Moriarty Habitat Unit, which is really a critical habitat unit for elk and other species important to Wyoming. There are feral horses moving off the reservation onto that unit, so there is an issue there. And my guess is there are feral horses moving across the Owl Creek onto state jurisdictional lands, BLM, et cetera, off the reservation as well. So I also looked at, to answer some of the questions that have come up regarding the numbers of horses on BLM lands or in BLM herd areas. I did want to show this. This is, I pulled this off the web. This is from the BLM. It's dated a year ago. So it's dated information. It doesn't include the roundups, I believe, that have occurred here in the last year that folks had spoken about. I'm not sure if you can see it, but in March of 2021, they had an estimate of 7,700 feral horses on BLM lands, as well as state and private lands that occur within their horse management areas. That was on about 10.3 million acres. In comparison to the reservation, the 5,000 that were observed is on about 1.9 million acres, and actually even a little bit less than that. So the point is that the density of horses on the reservation is multiple times higher than what you have on BLM land. So again, it's a very serious issue, and I've shared with the committee before, along with Tribal Fish and Game and the BIA, the impacts that these horses are having on the reservation. So it's a serious concern for sure, and certainly appreciate the committee's effort to help address this. I would also mention, Mr. Chairman, the question by the committee that regarding the sovereignty of the tribes. That is correct. They are a sovereign nation, and they are able to enter agreements with the governor at their discretion. I would mention too that the Wild Horse and Burro Act does not apply to tribal lands, and so it only applies to BLM lands and Forest Service lands. So the tribes are free to remove horses in any manner they so choose, so to speak. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions that folks might have.
Hey, thank you, sir. Any questions for the Fish and Wildlife Service? Well, I definitely have one. So you said you count over 5,000 horses on the reservation. What would you consider to be a healthy population?
Yeah, I would defer to the tribes as to what they would like to manage their horse levels to. But certainly, at this level, we're seeing some real severe damage that's occurring primarily to uplands, riparian areas. We haven't gotten to that point to determine what would be an appropriate level, but given the size of the reservation, certainly less than 1,000. And as a wildlife biologist, my concern is for fish and wildlife. And so the lower the horse levels, the better it's going to be for fish and wildlife on the reservation.
Sure, maybe. So you think it'd be fair to say that technically these horses could be considered an invasive species?
Yes, and that's how the tribes are approaching them.
Okay, very good. If I remember correctly also, and feel free to, not answer if you don't remember, but I seem to remember the cost being about $400 per head to remove these horses. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, I believe that's what Director Art Lawson had provided. I think $300 to $400 is what I had recalled from his email. I would also mention that the tribes have been actively removing horses, as has been presented to the committee in previous meetings, and they're actively doing that now as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. And to do some math, 5,000 times 400 is about $2 million, as it turns out. So as we look at that appropriation, I think that might be an important data point. And I also think it's important to verify that this is a successful program, or a program that does function, I should say, just needs a little bit of help, it would seem. So, okay, any questions, committee? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To either you, the chairman, or probably to the chairman, I guess. There's, it talks about $2 million appropriation. What amount of money is the Wind River Indian Reservation contributing to this, since it will benefit them also? Do you know?
Right. Yeah, we could ask that question of the tribes, see what they're currently expending on this program, and I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's probably something we could put in the bill. And I actually, in terms of paragraph F, ensuring that any revenue generated from general funds will be returned to the state, or something along those lines. So at least, if they're, say, selling horses that they gather, that, there's revenue that gets generated from that, and that should return to the state if it's general funds that we used to generate that revenue. There's other sideboards we can put in as well. I think that there has to be a matching effort, or if we want to put a ratio in there, that'd be another, specifically if you're dealing with another government, whether it be a tribe or a local government. I think those are all good sideboards that we're going to have to flesh out. as we look at paragraph F in a little bit more detail. So, so do you have any additional input, Pat?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and committee. So I don't have exact numbers, and I would certainly defer to Art Lawson, Director, Tribal Fish and Game, to answer that question. But they have purchased significant corral panels that are relatively expensive. They've been doing some helicopter roundup. Most of the work that they've done to gather the 600 plus horses that they have gathered over the last year has been on the ground using their labor, Tribal Fish and Game's labor, as well as native horse roundup folks that have a lot of experience doing this, and they're paying those folks an amount per horse. And so, again, I don't want to speak for the tribes, but it's certainly in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range that the tribes have been expending on the removals that have been done so far.
Well, do appreciate that number, and obviously I came with that $400 per head number somewhere, and just doing quick math here, 600 times 400 is 2,400. It's almost $250,000, presumably, that using that math that the tribes have spent on this issue. So hopefully that helps flesh out. I think that's an important discussion point. So thanks, Senator French, for asking the question. It's something we have to be thinking about how we're going to tighten up this bill a little bit. So, any further questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Okay, next up we have Travis McNiven online. Welcome to the Ag Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you, Travis McNiven with the Northern Arapaho Business Council. A number of the questions that I was going to answer for Senator French, Mr. Chairman, Patrick with Course Fish and Game answered with respect to the sovereignty question. In Wyoming, we are unique in that we have two sovereign governments, Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone, of course, sharing the same land mass. And so the tribal fish and game is with the wildlife and land is shared there and has that co-management. We are very supportive of this bill. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of just the Northern Arapaho. Appreciate the inclusion to allow for a cooperative agreement to be put in place. Again, this would be voluntary in nature on both sides, on the tribes and the part of the state. I would offer that as you think about sideboards, that leaving a certain amount of flexibility to both parties, both the state and the tribes, to figure out what makes the most sense as it relates to sideboards or in-kind, et cetera, would be appropriate in that we could, that would just be, I feel important to, if the, whatever sideboards the state wanted to put in that agreement doesn't necessarily have to be in the legislation, up front, that agreement could be put in place and those arrangements made. So I do offer that. But as was discussed by Fish and Wildlife, there are a lot of excess horses, a lot of feral horses. The tribal fish and game continues to, as has been described, remove those feral horses, both in terms of resource degradation there on the reservation, but also as those animals do tend to move off the reservation lands into state, and then of course federal lands as well. And so with that, certainly appreciate your time here this evening, and thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Senator French.
Mr. Chairman, real quick. When you gather, I think was mentioned 600 horses were gathered up or whatever. What do you guys do with them? Do you adopt them out? What's your program once you round them up?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Senator French, I would need to get back to the committee. I could check with Tribal Fish and Game on that question. But as was mentioned earlier, the Wild Horse and Burro Act does not apply on federal land or on tribal land. So they're a feral horse. And so they do not have the constraints as far as what to do with those horses once removed that the BLM does. And so all options are available to them. The expense, of course, is in getting them rounded up, and then what the horse market, what revenues they can receive to offset those roundups would be.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. McNiven. Good to see you as always.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further public testimony? Okay, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, moved by Senator Cost, second by Senator Wasserberger. So we'll go ahead. It's a little bit more in-depth, the bill, committee. And it looks like we haven't quite got an updated copy. I'm looking at the House action, and they did remove that $2 million appropriation, just so we know. So looks like, they basically removed all of Section 2. So that's something that we would have to change if we so desired, just so we're clear on that. Yeah, they removed the appropriation. So without the appropriation, we'd be left to B11 or find some other funds there. I personally prefer that we make the decision as a branch government that appropriates what the appropriate appropriation is. But anyways, we'll just start at the beginning here. Remember, on page 2, we have some definitions, a few important concepts. Affecting non-federal lands, state, municipal, county. That looks like not necessarily private lands. Remember, that's an important exclusion. AML means the appropriate management level, as we discussed, determination by the BLM or Forest Service, but mostly BLM, as to the appropriate level of horses on a particular piece of land to comply with their multiple use mandate. Herd management area, HMA, is the area that they delineate. It's also very clear on the website and in the spreadsheet that was just shared with us from Fish and Wildlife. But then you got on page 3, paragraph C. Once again, we have that important concept of, okay, we say upon the failure or refusal of the federal government to remove wild horses, as is required by federal law, but obviously it's tough to do in the checkerboard and places like that. But we don't know who determines when they failed or refused to do so. So that's a question there on paragraph C. We'll just go ahead and take some time to read it through here. Okay, so committee, I think we need to look at an amendment here to, like I said, to delineate who exactly makes that determination. I think the governor was thrown out there as a possibility. Makes sense to me personally. Any discussion on that element of paragraph C of page 3? Yeah, so I'd entertain a motion on page 3, line 13, after area, insert as determined by the governor.
I would move that amendment.
Okay. And of course, if also has technical corrections, they can have the leeway to do that, but that's the intent. So the governor's the one that decides whether there's been a failure or refusal.
So it read. Or United States Forest Service as belonging to the herd management area as determined by the governor, comma, which regularly stray from federal lands, comma.
Mm-hmm. Right, the operative verbs were modifying being failure or refusal. That's the way I read it. And like I said, if there's a technical correction.
Question?
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, say no. The motion carries. So then we go on the bottom of page 3, we go through the exact methodology that is delineated in statute, which has already been provided by state lands at our, I believe it is the Riverton meeting. And so that work has already occurred as far as I'm concerned. And we just go through the process there. And that takes us to the bottom of page 4. Any questions on the methodology there? Okay, going on page 5, paragraph D. It also delineates what happens if we do get reimbursement from the federal government at some point. You ever know?
Might be wishful.
Yeah.
Gonna pay us.
We have to take this seriously, right, Senator? But it simply says, depending on the land, the land affected, that's who's going to receive the payments. So if it's a county or municipal, it's going to be distributed to those counties, municipalities. If it's, the 85% or so, 86% so of state lands that go to the schools, then that goes to that. I believe that's what that part says. Just saying, that's how that's going to work. So important part of the process. And then going on to paragraph E, we have the permissive language that AG may seek a writ of mandamus to compel the federal governments to take action. And this is the part where we include private land on the top of page 6, recognizing that the horse does not recognize political boundaries. I seem to recall a discussion, do we want to limit ourselves to a writ of mandamus? It seems awfully prescriptive, almost micromanaging, even though it is permissive. If we want to add something, writ of mandamus or other legal means, perhaps that would be advisable, though I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other.
I would say it's probably better to be a little more flexible there.
Okay.
I would say amend. or
Go ahead.
any other-
You want to
On
push your
eight-
microphone, please,
that'd be
Senator
good.
Frost, yeah.
On line 18, page 5, I would say may seek a writ of mandamus or some other compelling document or some other document to compel the United States Bureau of Land Management or United States Forest Service is applicable. So just add in or some other, I don't know, document doesn't sound quite right.
I will probably leave that. I think we understand the concept. We can let also, the folks who went to law school
Right.
figure out the exact wording. But I think, the writ of mandamus or intent is some other legal means.
Correct.
So we have apparently the writ of mandamus is very important, so we'll keep it in there, but also give flexibility. So does everybody understand that more conceptual amendment?
Just gives them some flexibility.
Right, okay. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those say no.
No.
Okay, that motion carries, but just barely. Okay, then we get into, on page 6, paragraph F. As far as I'm concerned, this is the more important part of the bill. This is where we're actually going to, consider doing something to help with this issue within our state and utilizing all, leaving open the potential for any and all agencies or entities that may be involved, the BLM, Forest Service, both our tribes in the state, any cooperative tribal governing body, depending on the status of what is going on the reservation, any adjacent states, potentially NGOs or private entities. The committee will recall that there are several NGOs and even private entities that did sort of fertility control. There's private entities that are working with the BLM currently in Platte County. I know that they're my constituents that are doing these adoptions and have facilities that have been built to accomplish those goals. In addition, like I said, the fertility control. And then we have, once again, permissive language, page 6, line 12. Once again, so we want to leave some flexibility, but also provide some direction. They can include population reduction tactics, permanent and temporary fertility control, expanding or increased number of wild horse training and adoption programs, or other removal activity. So once again, trying to strike that balance between providing direction, but also leaving enough flexibility so we don't hem our executive branch in too much. And I think this is a part, after activities, we, on page 6, line 17, we should probably consider additional sideboards. So I have an idea, but I'll leave it open to the committee if somebody else has another idea for putting sideboards in here. Senator French.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how to word it, something along the line that the governor can enter into cooperative agreement with the two tribes. The tribes may, in their agreement, use in kind as they're part of the cost, I guess. So if they're out there on whatever, four-wheelers, pickups, plane, whatever they're using to round up horses there, that they can say it's an in-kind, contribution to this effort. So I don't know how to word that.
Right.
Be honest with you. It's pretty lengthy. Or it may not be necessary. I just don't know.
Right, yeah, 'cause I think that, there's nothing in there that necessarily says that there's going to be a match yet. And to me, that'd be a concept that would be incorporated into, if we said that there's going to be a in-kind match, or a joint agreement where the other entity puts in, has skin in the game, if it were. And so the first step in my mind would be to potentially require that whatever the other entity is, non-state entity is, provide some sort of matching resources. Was that the assumption, Senator?
If we're gonna, if we get the $2 million appropriation back in there, there's an effort.
I'll make sure
with
microphone.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. If we get the $2 million appropriation back in, with the state working with another sovereign nation to help them with their feral horse issue, where they stated they're already working on it, they've rounded up a certain amount. In that cooperative agreement, they could recognize that or something. The governor can recognize that, if they're spending, you did the math, they're spending a lot of money. So maybe it doesn't need to be said.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the only important part is if we spend state dollars and there's a revenue stream as a result, I think we need those dollars to come back to the state. That's about the only thing I was going to add there. So I could entertain motion, page 6, line 17. Sorry, go ahead, Senator Costin.
Well, I was just going to say, and at the same time, should we suggest some kind of a level of where they should be? They should stay in between that low and upper level or something, or somehow or do we get it down one time and then just it ends up going back up again? I mean, I hate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could add that and make sure that any cooperative agreement contributes to the long-term ability of the state to manage wild horses. So if you increase the say, for example, you want to look at the expanding or increasing the number of wild horse training and adoption programs, that would be a permanent reduction. Maybe you strike temporary fertility control and make sure it's only permanent. Things like that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree. My biggest concern is if we don't put anything in there of that nature, they get it down, are they done with the statute and then they can go back up again? I mean,
Right.
how do we try to get some sustainability to it?
Right. Well, that could be a good amendment. So maybe all cooperative agreements shall ensure long-term management of wild horse populations in excess of high ML.
Have a head shake over there. Not able to do?
Mr. Chairman, I'm shaking my head because I'm just frustrated because, I mean, it's just, they're just gonna come back again. I mean, unless you completely take them out. And then, I mean, the state has to come back in with another appropriation.
Oh, that's why I think it's important that we focus on things that provide the long-term increase in the capacity. So that you think in terms of how many wild horses we can adopt in the state. There's a set number, that's a constraint, and we increase the number that helps, in perpetuity, if we're talking about, say, building corrals to increase that number, that we can move out of the state. I think that'd be beneficial. That'd be a win. I think permanent fertility control would be a permanent, a more permanent solution that would at least adjust the curve, as it continues to go up and up, it would help. And at the end of the day, this is just a one-time appropriation that would revert on June 30th, 2024, if we reinsert the language. So there's.
And Mr. Chairman, what's your language?
Oh, okay. So going back to page 6, line 17.
Okay.
I suggest, once again, this is a ballpark language. Any cooperative agreement will ensure the long-term, will increase the ability of the federal government to manage wild horse populations permanently. So permanent infrastructure, things like that.
Is that your motion?
Yes, we'll do that one first. Yeah.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that amendment? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. In addition, I would also add language after that amendment. It says, any revenue generated as a result of a general fund expenditure shall be remitted to the state. Okay, any discussion on that amendment? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. And then finishing out the bill as it exists right now, cooperative undertaking, that just have a definition of that, and then definition of wild horse training and adoption programs, meaning that can include our Department of Corrections. So we had some discussion there. Not sure if that's a viable option moving forward, but it seems like there's good programs within DOC that could be expanded, and once again permanently increasing our capacity to move horses out of the state. So that's the bill. Once again, I think we do need to put section 2 back in there, at least, and then so we can at least have a discussion with our appropriations committee. We'll have to defend this to them when we get, if we put the.
I would move section 2.
Okay, all right. We want to go with
8 through page 8, line 2.
Okay, very good. So we're reinserting that section 2 basically. Let's double check, make sure what the House did exactly. Go ahead, Senator French.
Just a clarification. Does that need to, section 2 is Romanet, or number A and B. We just mentioned A. Does B 4 through 9 need to be mentioned in that or not?
That's what I'm checking right now. Is House Appropriations Committee Standing Committee number 1 deleted through line 9, it would look like. So
They deleted B, including
right,
B.
yes,
So
included
it
B.
puts the report back in.
Yes.
Okay, so correction on my motion,
Here.
which would be to insert section 2 on page 7, lines 8 through 23, and on page 8, lines 1 through 10.
Okay, very good. Any discussion on that?
No.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, any further discussion, committee? Any further amendments?
Question on the bill.
Okay, we'll see how this one goes. Do a roll call.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard submitted an absentee vote of aye. Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Cost?
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger?
Aye.
Chairman Boner?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5 ayes, do pass amended.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your participation. So we have 3 bills, committee bills, that are gonna be headed to the floor. Do I have a volunteer for taking up, for anybody wants the floor manage them? Go with House Bill 3. Got a volunteer there?
No,
So-
not me.
Senator Bouchard's gonna take all of them. It's,
Yeah, let's sign him to him. He didn't show up.
I'll get 3 issues.
Okay, Senator Cost, thank you. House Bill 4, do I have a volunteer? Senator French, or we can give that, we'll give that one to Senator Bouchard. How about that? Yeah, he hasn't done one yet. And I'll do 5. I'll volunteer for 5. Okay, thanks, committee, appreciate it.